syllabus and assignment creation. And what a fun topic. Some of you have already gone through that as grad students or faculty members. You've already been through that process firsthand, so you know what it's like. Others of you are actively thinking about this for your own classes, maybe as an instructor of record or as a lab coordinator, or you're also perhaps positioned to be thinking about these things as a future instructor when you're applying for jobs outside of UNLV. So optimal moment to reflect on how to go through this process of doing this well. We have an experienced and very talented set of panelists today. We're going to go alphabetically, but we'll start off with Dr. Gwen Marchand, who's in the Department of Educational Psychology and Higher Education.
Yes, it's changed a few times over the last few years.
So you live and breathe this stuff.
I do.
So you'll breathe in that air from her today. Then we have Dr. Alison Sloat, who's joining us from the College of Sciences and also coordinates the first year seminars, right?
Yes.
Which is also another a nice moment to think, how is this done in the sciences, but also for a lot of UNLV students. So well positioned as well to comment on a lot of this. And we've also intentionally run a gamut of fields to ensure we're not just touching on sociology, which is where our third panelist, Jennifer Whitmer, is a Ph.D. candidate and a recent Graduate College Teaching Award recipient. So we immediately said, congrats. Come join us for a panel. So this is an opportunity to hear from her about what's worked and her observations, expertise, and so forth. So thank you all to our panelists for sharing their wisdom. Those of you here today, but also watching on the video too, regale yourselves in all this wonderful material ahead.
What I'm here to talk to you about isn't to tell you that there's one right way to do anything. So this is in no way prescriptive, okay? This is basically, what I'd like to talk to you about is a collection of my experiences over the last, let's see, I've been teaching since graduate school, so in the last 10 years or so. And the other part of that is not just my own experience, but also what I study. So I study student motivation and engagement. So that's always in the forefront of my mind when I'm reading and doing my own research is what could I do to better help my students find this information authentic and meaningful, and to help them, even if it's just for a brief time, if it's not something that they're initially particularly interested in, sustain enough interest that they're able to deeply think about the information, participate in a positive way, and feel good about it. I'm not wanting them to, necessarily jump up and down and say, this is the best thing in the world. I teach a lot of research methods courses. This is not something people usually jump up and down about. But we know that when we're able to set structure so that we clearly communicate expectations, which is what the syllabus is about, and good assignment communication. And we also know that when we support students in helping them understand how the material is relevant to their own lives, and when we help them understand that we care about what they learn, then all the research, as well as my own experience and probably the experience of my fellow panelists, would suggest that students have a tendency to engage more deeply. And when they do that, they have a tendency to not only learn the material better, but retain it better. So those are all things in my mind when I'm thinking about what can I do as an instructor to create a syllabus that's a positive roadmap, that's a clear roadmap, as well as create assignments that help not just with the memorization of the material and spitting it back to me, but help them actually apply it when they're out in the real world. Getting teachers to want to apply research methods can be a little bit of a challenge. So I'm sure that there are some challenges as well from my other panelists. So I just have one thing to say about kind of the requirements of the syllabus. There are things, which I'm sure you're aware of if you've been teaching here at all, that we have to have in our syllabus, okay? So because I'm going first, I just wanted to let you know that there are these things that we absolutely have to pay attention to, and they're there for a reason. So my strongest advice when it comes to syllabus creation is just take it seriously. If you treat it seriously, and when you're communicating it to your students, that this is designed to be a document that you can refer to throughout the semester, that this is something that is really important, that these policies aren't just oh, I have to put this on the syllabus, but they're there for a reason. If we communicate that to them and we take it seriously, they have a tendency to also take it seriously, okay? I've seen and been in situations where sometimes instructors are a little flippant about things. So for example, we have a research requirement in my college for a lot of the classes that we teach. And students are required to participate in 3 credits of research. I think that's actually very beneficial for them, especially from a research methods course. Okay, so it's my job to explain to them why that's beneficial. I tell them, I say, look, you get 10% of your grade, so don't just do this because there's 10% of your grade depending on this, but do this because the other side of not just knowing how to design research and to implement research and to understand research, the other aspect is what does this mean for human subjects that are participating in research? What is their experience like? So I want them to understand that this is important from both sides as well, that when we have our research subjects take their experience seriously, it enhances the validity of our studies as well. So instead of just saying, oh, this is something you have to do, okay? Or some of the provost policies where there are things, for example, we have to have academic misconduct in our syllabus. We also have to have things, information about how to access the writing center, about religious holidays. Those are all things that are actually important information for them to look at. So these are all things that have to be on the syllabus, and this is updated every semester. So that's the other thing to think about. A syllabus is not something that you just do the first time you teach a class and never revisit it. This is something we need to go back and treat as a document to be revised, to change every semester based on feedback from students, as well as understanding our own reflection of what did and did not work as an instructor, what did not happen in the class. Okay, so these are things, just some basic stuff. Y'all can read, that's why you're here. But you have to have information about your, where they can find you. If you have a teaching assistant, that needs to be on there as well. Learning outcomes for the course, which I'm not going to spend really much time talking about here today. I think someone else might be spending a little more time on that. What are the information? How can they find, or what are the books that they need to use? All of the assignments and due dates, if known. That's a little different than having a class schedule. Okay, so I recommend having a class schedule as well, but these can be more basic. But you can also put on there what's unique to your class, okay? So beyond just the requirements, which some people are like, okay, this is the required information, that's it. Students, particularly students that are new to an area or those that aren't that familiar with it, have a tendency to want more structure, okay? So you don't have to be like, you have to be here 30 seconds late, you're in trouble, don't bother coming into my class. However, if that's your expectation, you want to put that on your syllabus, that's the place to do it. So consider this as a contract, okay? So when we're going into this, you might want to consider, do I want to put all of the assignment details on this document, or do I want to keep them separate? So for example, in my class, and several of my classes in my program evaluation class, I have a project that builds upon the whole semester. Okay, so there are different steps throughout the semester that they need to meet in order to do well in the class and in order to learn the objectives. I don't want to put that all in my syllabus because then my syllabus would be like this 30-page document. That would be completely overwhelming. I want the syllabus to be something they can refer to and find the information about what they need to do to succeed in the class in an easy way. So I put that separate. However, I put like a little paragraph about how much it's worth, what the basic information is about the assignment, and then I even put in there, please see the attached document as well. I also do that because I might want to make changes to that assignment throughout the semester. Like let's say, for example, I'm sick one day and I can't make it to class and there's something due that day and the rest of the project is contingent on that throughout the semester, then I want to be able to make changes without having to feel like I'm changing a contract. Okay? I also think it's important to put kind of your own policies. So in my class, I have a please don't talk on your cell phone, please don't answer your phone, and I explain to them why. It's not even so much that I find it rude, but it really distracts from other students learning. So if there's somebody sitting there laughing while they're texting or they're, picking up a phone. I've had students actually answer phones in class when I was teaching undergraduates, and I couldn't believe they did that. I'm like, oh, really? But I also recognize I teach a lot of adults with families. So I have in there, if you need to have your phone on, please put it on vibrator or whatever, vibration, and leave the room if you need to take it. I'm not going to penalize you for doing that if you've got a job that requires you to be available or small children at home and you want to be available. And then also, I think it's also a nice thing to put what students can expect for you in terms of your response time. So I also teach online classes, and this is particularly important in online classes. Students feel sometimes disconnected, they feel like you're not there, they're not sure what to expect. So I like to let them know that you can expect a response from me in 24 hours to an email. You can expect an assignment to be graded within a week. You know, I let them know because that also forestalls the 20 emails at the beginning of the semester. Why haven't you graded this yet? Did you get the assignment? What's going on? It's like, look, this is when I can refer them back. Please refer to the syllabus for this. And it also helps with, I put information in there as well about penalties for late assignments so that it's clearly spelled out, and as well as what can happen, what process they need to follow if they do have a late assignment. Okay. So one of the things that students, especially as we start off, run into, which is the idea of what do you do if you need to change your syllabus. So this is going to happen. You cancel a class. It changes some of the information, or you are finding out that your students are progressing at a very different pace than you expected if it's the first time you've ever taught a class. And you might decide, you know what, I'm going to remove. I think I should maybe take this assignment that was considered part of the grade and maybe make it extra credit. Okay. It's important to realize that if you do this, you cannot change a syllabus in the middle of your semester. You shouldn't. I don't know. It's actually, it cannot. I think it is. If it will in any way negatively affect the student. Okay, so if you decide to change the structure of your assignments or the way that you assign points to those and how it feeds into the final grade, if you do that, you need to ensure that it's not going to create a hardship for students, or it's not going to penalize them for what they've already done. Okay, so if suddenly an assignment is worth more and future assignments are no longer going to be in place, then that could create a penalty for those students. Okay, so it's something to consider. You can change the syllabus, but you can't do it in a way that's going to be harmful to the students because they have a set expectation at the beginning of the class. Okay, so keep those things in mind. I think it's important to consider. The other thing in terms of thinking about is how does the structure of your course influence the way you might want to communicate information on your syllabus? Okay, and this is the same when it comes to assignments as well. So, for example, if you have online classes that are offered repeatedly, you may want to have a separate syllabus and you don't change them very often. Let's say you offer it every semester, or multiple sections a semester, and those shells roll over from your instructional designer. You may want to have a syllabus that doesn't have dates on it. Okay, so a syllabus that is kind of the primary document, and then have a separate document that is the class schedule, and that's the one you change every semester. Okay, I teach a class over and over again. I've worked with our instructional designers who are great in trying to develop the best online class I can come up with, and that is something that I found particularly useful that was recommended to me. Okay, so it's something to consider. You also may need additional detail in online documents. So, for example, if I teach research methods in a face-to-face class and research methods in an online class, my online schedule of information for has much more detail about the discussions that we might have, like what types of information is expected in there, when things are due, in a different way than in a face-to-face class where I can answer those questions. Okay, so the other thing to consider is what is exemplary behavior in your online and traditional classes from students. Some people structure syllabus to talk about kind of what is the mastery that I'm hoping to get out of this class, what would an ideal participation type of situation look like for a student. You should come to class every day, you should participate in discussions, whatever the case may be, but also think about what would my best be back. So what could I agree to give back to you? So you don't have to put this information in there, but I think it's important to consider it as you move forward in designing the syllabi. All right, so with assessment, just a few things to think about as you're designing your assessments. And the things I think about is how can I promote engagement with material? What is the nature of the assignment, and what can I do to help students want to do this? Okay. The other thing is how can you determine what they've learned? Okay, so we have formative and summative assessments. We are trying to understand and create assessments that ultimately give us information about their knowledge in this particular area. And then the other aspect of assessment is how can I find out what they still need to learn. So sometimes when we just give tests in classes, for example, we find out what they've learned, provided we've taught that and provided they've engaged, but we haven't necessarily, that doesn't always tell us information about what they still need to learn, okay? So that's something to consider. And when we talk about assessment, there's many options. Do you want to have more formative assessments? So am I going to have multiple times throughout the semester where I'm trying to gauge information about their engagement, their learning, and what still needs to be learned? Or do I just want to have a midterm and a final exam that breaks the semester into 2 knowledge chunks, and then kind of we summatively decide what they do? I don't take that approach personally, but I'm also lucky in that I teach graduate classes most often, so I have the luxury to be able to assign papers, to be able to give feedback, to have a more mastery approach to assignments. When I teach undergraduate classes, it's a little bit different. There needs to be a balance, okay? But that doesn't mean you can't get formative information. We can use tools like clickers in our class, okay? So you can give a quick, let's talk about what we were supposed to read last night. Here's a quick quiz. What do you think? If we talk about these different options in terms of research methods, what's a probability sample? And kind of getting some information about the extent to which they understand, and then maybe at the end of class, reusing that very same formative type of quiz to see if we've had any gains. That type of information is useful, and it's anonymous, okay? It doesn't single people out, because when you ask people to raise their hands, sometimes people feel threatened by that, okay? We also want to think about authentic assessment approaches. So these are approaches that connect their learning to the real world. So I teach program evaluation. At the end of my entire semester is focused around a community-based project, okay? So in terms of developing tools that you can use to communicate with people out in the real world about what it is that they're doing. We do interviews, we go out with community members, and we provide them with logic models. We have multiple feedback types of sessions. This is considered an authentic type of assessment because it's showing them how they can apply what they're learning. And they also, it also does a benefit in that they end up having exposure with these different community organizations that they can then oftentimes touch back with later on when they're looking for jobs. Okay. You can have individual or group projects, and again, I don't want to take up too much time here, but in terms of that, so my program evaluation project is a group project. They receive a group grade at the end of the semester. This can be a problem. What? They want to have
Slackers.
Yeah, so you have freeloaders, right? The people that show up and they don't necessarily engage very thoroughly, and this can breed resentment. There can be problems with this. So when I have a group project where there's going to be a group grade, I always have individual components as well. Okay, so for example, I have them do a reflection paper at the end of that where it just goes to me. They talk about their experience with the group. They have to take it seriously, ask them several guiding questions, and it's a percentage of their grade. I also have them do separate bridge activities where they have to read an evaluation research article and apply that to policy or practice. Okay, so these are separate pieces so that their grade is not completely dependent on the group projects. That I never recommend that. It never goes well. So, but the other thing to think about is when you're developing assessment, is the goal of your assessment to determine mastery? So are you going to take an approach where you're going to allow them to continue to go back and revisit that same assignment to shoot for a higher grade, or if they can demonstrate a higher level of understanding? Okay, so if you have that, you might have a class where everybody gets an A, which might be just fine. Some people might say, well, that's terrible, there should be more differentiation. Well, maybe you want everybody to have mastery, and that's okay. Or are you looking to determine if there's a threshold of performance that someone has met, have they demonstrated their knowledge? Okay, so these are decisions that you need to make, in the way that you structure your assessments really differs, and it will influence the final grade distribution in your class as well. Okay, so are you giving tests where you're looking at performance, or even just a final paper where they don't get feedback on what you're expecting as compared to a process that's going to take more? Okay, so finally, thinking about those assessment type of issues, formative and summative, do I want mastery or performance types of displays of knowledge in my class? Are we going to look at authentic assessments, or do I just want to know that they have a basic level of knowledge and a grasp of the concepts? A lot of that depends on what your course is like. Okay, so I've learned the hard way that these ideal things that I think I've set up in some formats don't work with others. So for example, am I going to have a traditional, an online, or a hybrid course? And I give small papers where I'm able to give feedback readily in traditional courses, face-to-face courses. When I'm in an online type of setting, I make those discussion posts where people need to go in and interact with that in a different way. And the reason I do that is because we can talk about this information. Like, let's say people do a small paper about their understanding of qualitative research. And I can bring that to the group and say, let's talk about what this means. Let's have small groups and break into that information. And you can share what you learned during the course of your assessment or the course of your assignment. In an online setting, that doesn't work very well. Okay, so I structure it as, let's all read the same qualitative article, and then I'd like you to have a discussion post about the technical aspects of that and an application aspect of this. And then we do small groups where they have to respond in those ways. It's just different because it doesn't work in the same way. Undergraduate or graduate, you might not be able to give really good formative information about your writing when you have 200 people in an undergraduate course. So if that's important to you, how can you develop ways to be able to do that? Okay, do you need to break into small groups? Do you have some kind of group project? Do you have a teaching assistant that can handle part of the load? Do you have one short writing assignment where they're required to meet with you during the course itself, during the class time, where you carve out 10 minutes per class and you say, okay, I read this one-page paper that you wrote. Here are some thoughts about how to structure the organization of that paper. It's different than a seminar class where you're giving feedback every week about a paper a proposal that's being developed. As well as the size. So small, moderate, and then I just think there's enormous. I don't know that there's any of this. So in thinking about these issues that I just talked about, you know, it's, as I said, there's no one right way. But you have to determine what you are hoping to get out of this, what the requirement of your department is in terms of that information. You might not have a lot of flexibility in how you can structure your syllabus or your courses, but you may be able to use in-class tools like having students write questions on index cards that they turn in at the end of class, and then you can go back and look at those and say, okay, there are a few questions that kept coming up. Let's address these at the beginning of class. So there are different ways to promote engagement and learning in classrooms, and these are just some things I'd like you to think about.
Turn it over to Dr. Sloat to share, for example, what happens in first-year science seminars.
So I'm going to kind of shift gears and talk a little bit about creating assignments. I teach the first-year seminar for the College of Sciences. I started teaching this class about 3 years ago, and at the time it was a 1-credit class, and then when first-year seminars became required for all students at UNLV, it became a 2-credit class. And so by then I was the coordinator of the course, and it was my job to now make it a 2-unit class. So this class really has evolved since I started teaching it. And so I've had a lot of experience with creating new assignments and new ways to make sure that the students are learning the skills they really need to learn. So with that in mind, I just completed a workshop here at UNLV called the Research-Based Course Redesign Program. And I am now this semester implementing all of these changes that I learned about last semester. And so one of the main goals of that program is to ensure that you are stating the purpose and the task and the skills your students are going to learn at every single lecture, during every single assignment, during every single exercise, during every activity. So in the interest of maintaining that, the purpose of what you're going to learn today is how to design these effective assignments that are going to teach your students the skills you want them to learn at the end of the semester. And as a result of that, of what you're going to learn today, hopefully you'll be able to design your own assignments that can do this. Okay. So when you are designing your syllabus, if you are designing it here at UNLV or wherever you are teaching, try to make sure that you are aligning your own course outcomes with the goals of the university. So at UNLV we have the ULOs, which are the undergraduate learning outcomes. And so every course at UNLV is supposed to follow these 5 standard ULOs, and they will probably change depending on wherever you are teaching. But every assignment, every main activity is supposed to follow these, and so you can read those here. And when you are designing your assignments, if you are either redesigning assignments or trying to figure out what you want to have your students do, think about 3 years from now, what do you want your students to still remember from your course? What skills do you want them to be able to do? And that can really help guide what your assignments are going to be and what your exercises might be. So for example, if we use Bloom's taxonomy kind of wording here, you want them to be able to evaluate information. You want them to be able to analyze information. Do you want just simple comprehension? Or what, depending on the level of your course, what do you want them to be able to do? And so there's a little formula that you can follow here. Students should be able to, and then you insert your verb or whatever you want them to be able to do, and that becomes your learning outcome. So think about what, for example, what 3 main learning outcomes would you want for your students to achieve as a result of taking your course in 3 years. So if we follow Bloom's taxonomy, most courses probably follow this main set of guidelines. And depending on the level of your course, you may only get to knowledge and comprehension and application. But depending on how into detail you go in the course, sometimes you can get to that creation point where students can use all of these skills, all of these standard skills, and create some sort of new knowledge or new thing that they can demonstrate they've learned all of these different skills. So if you're wondering, well, what do you want your students to learn? If they are able to list or identify or define something, those are really the basics for comprehension and for knowledge in terms of Bloom's taxonomy. So at the bottom, these are the skills that go along with Bloom's taxonomy with these different types of steps. And then at the top, these are how you can implement these within your course. So if you just use lectures or visual aids, those are ways that you can help students define information or describe information. If you use some sort of test or writing, that can help students comprehend that information better. In terms of application and analysis, typically exercise or practice helps in those steps. So if you want them to be able to analyze something or apply what they've learned in your course, exercises, problems, those are good ways to do that. And then if we get into the evaluation and the creation stage, if students do a particular project where they have to create something new, in the course I teach, the students they spend most of the semester researching a scientific question. They do all the research that goes along with it, and then they create a scientific poster and present it at the end and identify future work that's needed. And so they go through all these different steps as freshmen. And it can be very daunting at the beginning, but one of the keys to this whole process is that it's supposed to be a struggle. The students learn better when they are struggling through each one of these steps. And it is more rewarding when they are attaining those goals at the end of that struggle. So if you're thinking of ways to incorporate these different skills you want your students to learn, then these are ones at the top. These are all ways that you can do that when you are designing a new assignment. Okay, so this is all the research that kind of backs up the things that I'm going to talk about. One of the best ways to make sure students are learning what they are needing to learn according to the research is to state the purpose and the task and the criteria on every single assignment. That initially helps best because the students know from the beginning what they're going to be learning. And you may state it at the beginning of your class. And when I first started to hear this, I thought, well, of course we're telling them the purpose. Well, obviously, we're telling them why they need to know this. But if you state it on every single assignment, then that helps the students who may not learn in an auditory way the best. If they are visual learners and it's stated on their assignment, this is why you need to do this, this is what a good assignment looks like, then that can increase student retention and student achievement. It also helps to build critical thinking if you are stating these all from the get-go. Also, if you provide in advance criteria for student success or an example of student success, that is extremely helpful, and that usually really helps improve the product that students are turning in at the end of the year, or at the end of the semester. Self, peer, and group evaluations are also really effective. This is one of the things that I'm going to try this semester as part of my course redesign. I usually spend tons and tons of time grading drafts. And so one of the things I'm going to try is instead of having, I'm not going to grade them anymore, I'm going to have peer evaluations of the drafts. And I'll see how it works. I'm not really sure how it's going to pan out, but we'll find out. Okay, so again, state at the beginning on in every lecture, every assignment, every exercise, if you do in-class exercises, why students are doing this. And it may seem obvious, but it may not always seem obvious to them. What skills are they going to learn as a result of completing this assignment or this class exercise? What knowledge are they going to learn? What is the task? So what exactly do they have to do, and what does a successful assignment look like? So this is kind of small, but this is an example, and I have examples if you want to see an example. One of the assignments I do in my class, students evaluate a past poster from a past semester from a student. And so they have to analyze that poster and identify the different components of it and analyze it and see, is there enough scientific evidence in this poster to convince them of the conclusion the students made when they designed this poster. And so it shows an example of successful work. They have to analyze that information. They have to identify the different parts of it. And so it's a really useful tool when students are trying to complete their own assignment in their own poster. Okay, and this is another example of providing an example of student work or successful assignment. So this is on the back of the assignment, this is what a successful assignment looks like. So students can use this as a guide to try to design their own and make their own. So at the top you can see that the purpose, the skills, the knowledge, the task, and then at the bottom the criteria for success is all stated explicitly on each assignment and each exercise. And I'm starting this semester, so we'll see at the end how that works. Okay, so here are the steps again to, if you want to use this process and design your own, or design new assignments or redesign assignments. Identify the learning outcome. What do you want students to be able to do? 3 years from now, what do you want them to still remember? Identify the skill that you want them to learn, and then design your assignment around that skill. And then create the purpose, the skills, the knowledge, the criteria for success, and state that on every assignment that you are designing. And then apply it, and then revise, revise, revise. It always takes revision on all of these to see what works in this process.
So we'll turn it over to our third panelist, who will share her insights from sociology, where she's a Ph.D. student, and again, recently won a graduate teaching award.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
My name is Jenny Whitmer, and I am from the Sociology department, as was mentioned. Having seen what Gwen and Alison were planning on talking about beforehand, I didn't want to repeat too much of what they were saying. So I thought I could give you some, concrete ideas of things that I've done that have been successful, that have worked in covering some of these things that Gwen and Alison were talking about in terms of being clear in your expectations, in terms of being transparent in your assignment creation, setting expectations, and really trying to encourage participation and engagement, which I think is one of the main goals that we have in all of our classes, trying to get students to actually say something or not nod off at the very least. And as I was preparing for this presentation, I was looking at a little bit of the scholarship on teaching and learning, and one thing I came across was this idea of the syllabus as a tool of socialization, which I thought was really interesting. Not just in the case of socializing students into the expectations for our particular class, but especially for those of us who teach maybe 101 or introductory level classes or first year classes, in terms of socializing students into how to be successful college students, because it's a lot different. Being a successful college student is a lot different from being a successful high school student or an unsuccessful high school student. So I think it's so important not just to establish the expectations for our class, but to let them know what kind of things we expect from them as college students. Taking responsibility for your own learning, being on time, being professional. And so that's something that I try to accomplish with my syllabi, not just by the content of the syllabus, but also by the tone you strike. So I like to use first person and talk about, first and second person instead of third person. So it's kind of like I'm clearly communicating with the student. Like, here's what I am going to be doing. Here are my responsibilities to you as an instructor. And here are some of the things that I expect of you, the things that you are going to be doing. So it's a little bit more active the way you're talking about it. Of course, being very clear about your expectations, the course objectives, the schedule. There's always going to be something that you didn't expect. A student always asks a question that you would never have thought would be a question to ask, but so you can't cover everything, but just trying to anticipate things where there might be areas of confusion. I can't remember who mentioned it, but it's important to make sure that if you do change the syllabus, it's not going to be to the student's detriment. So one thing I do is, if I'm not completely sure about which articles or which readings I want to include, I might, at the beginning of semester, add a few more so that I have an option to take them out, which usually makes students happy, that it seems like they're getting a good deal. Because it's going to be easier to take them out, and it's not going to be a burden on the students. It's a lot easier to take things out than to add things in, and it's a lot more fair to your students. They sign up, they stay in the class with certain expectations, and you want to make sure that you live up to those expectations. Now, you can be as clear and concise and as transparent as you want, but that won't do you any good if the students don't actually look at the syllabus or look at the assignments. So one thing that has been suggested in a lot of the scholarship, and one thing that I have tried implementing this semester, is doing a syllabus quiz. I handed it out during my class, like the first day as we were going through the syllabus, and I said, turn this in the place where you're supposed to turn this in, because I have them turn in their assignments on web campus. So they filled it out during that. I made sure they were paying attention and they got the important things about, where to email me, when and where our assignments due, some of the important things that I wanted them to get out of that syllabus. And I made sure right off the bat that they actually were aware of these things. And that's actually, so far, we're very early on in the semester, so it could go very wrong at some point. But so far, I haven't had too many questions about those kind of things, and it's been very successful. In terms of designing assessments, something that's come up again and again is this importance of establishing expectations. Be specific about what you want students to do and why. That idea of stressing the purpose is so important, because so many times students will get an assignment and they're like, why do I actually have to do this? What is this accomplishing? It's not something you can take for granted. I remember one of my first semesters teaching, it was towards the end of the semester, I was talking about, they were about to turn in their final papers, and somebody raised their hand and they're like, why did we do this paper? And I'm like, oh, I thought I had made it so clear. It was clear in my head. But you can't take these things for granted. You have to make sure that you communicate these things to them. So I make sure I do that both in class as we're describing the assessments and also on the paper. Be clear about, this is why you're doing this. It's very important to do this both to, set the expectations, be sure that students and you are on the same page, and also to increase some of the control that students feel that they have over their learning. So they can see, what, this isn't just, she's not just assigning this to be a taskmaster and be mean. Like, there's a reason behind this. There's a method behind this kind of madness. And the more detailed you are in those expectations, the less stress it is for the students, as well as for you. So the more detailed you can be right off the bat, the better as far as that goes. I like to try to do things to encourage students to participate in class, which we all know can be difficult, and also to encourage reading. So something that I've always done is to have first of all, have assignments due on web campus before class, so that nobody's coming to class late because they were finishing something up, and also so that the students have to do the reading to complete the assignment before they come to class. And that's something that has worked pretty well for me. And one thing that's nice about that too, if you do that far enough ahead of time, you can look at those assignments before class and you can use that to see what are some of the things that students are having trouble with, what are some of the questions they have. Maybe some of your students one of your students says something really interesting and you can incorporate that into the lecture and make it a little bit more engaging for them. So that's something that I've always liked doing. It's officially called just-in-time assignments. That's the official name for it, but I just call them reading assignments. That's worked really well. And you can do that with any kind of subject. You can do that. You can do it either with prompts, like a specific question about the reading. You can do maybe multiple choice questions or short answer questions, like a little quiz. Or in the past I've had a set of questions that I would ask for every reading about, what are some of the main points, what are some questions that you might have about this, what are some strengths and weaknesses. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this. And I also like to try to do things to encourage student autonomy. So in terms of getting them to choose things that are interesting to them. Gwen, you said you teach research methods, and it can be difficult to get students engaged with that. I teach classical social theory, so I'm having students read a bunch of dead white European guys, which is not often something that they're super interested in doing. So I try to do things to get them to see how it is relevant to their lives. So I assign a semester-long writing project, a paper that's due at the end of the semester. And the first thing I do, I say, don't worry about what theorists you're going to talk about. Tell me something that you're interested in and something that you would like to write a paper about, or something that you would not dislike writing a paper about. And from there, I can go and see what their interests are and try to tailor my feedback to get them to choose something to see how one of these theorists would apply to their own interests in sociology. Because they come in and they're like, all these sociologists, they don't have anything to do with the things that I'm interested in. They were writing 100 years ago. Why do I have to take this class? Why is it required? So I try to get them to apply it in that way by choosing things that they're interested in and trying to get them to do an assignment that they're interested in, that they'll be engaged in, and see how they can make those connections and apply that knowledge, because ideally, we don't just want them to know the concepts, we want them to be able to engage critically with it. And lastly, when doing a big project like that, I remember when I was an undergrad, if something was due May 7th, I started it on May 1st if I was being really proactive about it. So in my syllabi, and as I'm designing assignment, a large-scale semester-long project like that, I will put in what I call benchmark assignments. So first thing you do, you pick a topic. That way you're thinking about the paper early on. You're not married to the topic, you could change it, but at least you're thinking about it. You do a reference list, you do an outline. You can turn in a first draft if you want and have a chance to do revisions. So there's all these points at which the students they're working on the paper and they're working towards it, so it makes it a lot more manageable for them. And it's something that's ongoing instead of something that they're just like, oh crap, it's due in a week, I've got to actually, maybe figure out what I'm writing my paper on. So that's something that's been successful. And again, in terms of not taking things for granted, I find a lot of students have trouble with their writing skills and with their research skills. So take advantage of the other resources that are available on campus. So a lot of students, if you want them to do a research project and you want them to look up things in the library and peer-reviewed sources, a lot of them just don't know what that is. So take advantage of the resources in the library. I've had the subject librarians give presentations to my class, and they're the experts, they know how to do these things, and it's really clarifying, and it really helps students to realize, oh wait, that's what a peer-reviewed source is. That's why it's better than Wikipedia or a blog post or something, and here's how I actually get access to these things. So, take advantage of the other resources that are available on campus as well. I think that takes care of all the points that I had, so I guess with that, I don't know if
So now, yeah, well, thank you.
Thank you.
So as promised, we have plenty of time, so if our three panelists are now open to grilling. But here's an opportunity for each of you to share some of the questions you have that are in your mind, things related to current teaching or projected teaching experiences, things that are worked, things that, I don't know, there's plenty of open, flexible time in what remains.
At the end of the year, the students fill out the teacher rating, the class rating. What happens to those, and how do you incorporate that into your new class teaching?
So usually those go, in my case, they go to me because I'm the course coordinator. So for all of the instructors, after all the grades are turned in, those come to me, and I distribute those to the individual instructors showing the feedback the students have given. And then we listen a lot to student feedback, and that's how you make the course better. Is, do they have suggestions for the course? And sometimes they do, and we have used those. They say the study skills portion of the course was the best thing that we learned, and make sure that we keep that in there.
And those comments are really important. And I think, there's a couple of issues to consider in terms of how you can you want students to respond to those. Okay, that actually matters in terms of the assessment. If you end up going into academics, your evaluation of your performance is based off of those student evaluations. And when you're trying to find jobs, if you want a teaching job, oftentimes people will request your course evaluations from your teaching when you're a graduate student. So those do matter. And I think it's important to tell students that you take it seriously, that you read those and you use those in future work, and even provide explicit examples of how that happens. So for example, when I teach a multi-level modeling class, and I only teach it every couple of years, and every time I teach it, I go through those, I go back. That's the first thing I do before I re-prep it, is I go back and I look at those evaluation comments, and I say, okay, what worked really well? What didn't work really well? And then I always pick out at least one, and the next semester when I teach it, I say, last semester I had a student say that, the final assignment, they needed more feedback on that throughout the semester, so this is the way that I've changed that this semester when I'm teaching this class. And I think when they see that, they recognize that you are paying attention to what they do, The other thing that's important, because you want those, you know, fundamentally you want them to be accurate, but you also are hoping that students respond in a way that helps you, right? And so some of the research I sat on a course evaluation task force a couple of years ago here at the university, where we looked at factors that influence course evaluations. And as you move forward in teaching, things doing like a midterm formative feedback or formative evaluation, where you ask your students to respond in some anonymous way, whether you do a little Qualtrics survey or you have them turn in a quick write-up about things that they really like about the class so far and things that maybe you could change that might be helpful for them. You can't do it all, but just even having them be able to respond to that mid-semester increases course evaluations, because they have a sense that you're listening to them and you care about them, and that has a tendency to be much of what students respond to. And the techniques that were discussed in terms of clearly stating the purpose for assignments, linking that to the learning goals, those types of things also help increase the course evaluation, because they have a clear understanding for why they're doing what they're doing instead of having it feel like it's arbitrary.
And before I give out the course evaluation, sometimes students will evaluate things on things that have nothing to do with pedagogy. So I'd like to stress, you know, I take these seriously. It's important. I use these things to, you know, maybe I take this feedback seriously and I incorporate it into my classes, but make sure you're focusing on things that I have control of. You know, I didn't choose, I have no control over how the room smells or things like that. So, I mean, just trying to, so all these things about letting them know that you take these seriously and showing them that, as well as telling them, you know, what is appropriate to talk about on a course evaluation is important, because I have gotten comments about the smell of the room. I'm like, it's not my fault, guys.
Something personal if they don't like your hair.
Yeah.
Or something. Please address that privately.
Yes.
I have a few questions. This was my first semester teaching 102, and I was given my assignment in class maybe a week before school started. How much time should you put into your creating a syllabus?
I mean, you could take forever to to create a syllabus. It can take a long time, but.
Were you the sole owner of the course? Was it your job to create the syllabus?
Yeah, this was the first time I had as much autonomy that I've ever had. One, they just kind of give you everything. This one was, and they gave me a couple sample syllabi, and it was still hard for me to, but to try and prepare a nice class for the semester, a week, no way.
That's such a short amount of time.
Yeah, not if you want to, you know, so. Again, how much time would you take?
You know, if for something like that, how much time generally, I think that's a really hard question.
Okay.
I don't know that I can answer that. However, I have a recommendation.
Yes.
If you have a situation like that, which I would like to say will not continue to happen throughout your career, but that is not true. I would actually try to keep your syllabus relatively minimal.
Okay.
I would actually try to just have the more basic information in that particular case that is required to be in the syllabus.
Yes.
And then the rest of it, just set up the expectation at the beginning and say, here's the syllabus that has the basic requirements for the class. I think it's okay. I mean, some people say, well, you don't want students to know that you just got this class, so that you know, and so I've had people say that. That has not been my experience. I think people have a tendency to be relatively forgiving. So if you say, I'm going to give you, you know, in the next 2 weeks, you're going to be getting every assignment for the semester, and here's the detail I'm going to give you. Or if you want to say, you know, here's the reading list that we have now. This may change as I get a better idea of what you understand and how we need to progress. I think that's okay to kind of save some of the information you may have included if you had more time to prepare, and kind of unveil that or unroll that as the class progresses, rather than trying to create a document that you feel has all this information in it that you're not really sure you can stand by. That's just my advice. I don't know, you guys might really differ on that. So
one semester I was told the night before that I would teach a class, and I had to design the entire course, and so it was fairly simple because it was a fairly simple course with just a textbook and tests and exams, but I just said at the beginning, I was given this class last night, bear with me, and I will change things based on your interests and what the class is doing and how they're doing things, so that's just how I think about it.
Quickly, my class kind of said they were getting frustrated and said, this is unorganized. So I just responded, life's not going to be organized, so just get ready. You know,
this is the way it's
prepare for it in this class. Dr. Sloat, is it? You talked about peer evaluations, and we do them in class once. Are you saying that I only see the project, the final? You know, you discuss it in class, obviously. Because that works. I got a list of drafts at home now.
That's what I'm trying this semester, because it takes a lot of instructor time to grade all of this, and that was one of the things I was finding. I was spending all this time grading drafts, and students weren't paying a bit of attention to my comments. They were still turning in. They just printed off the same draft and handed it in, and I was getting really frustrated, and it wasn't a good use of my time. So if it's a good use of peer time, if the peers are learning something by evaluating the draft, then the students who don't pay attention to it, they probably wouldn't anyway. So if somebody else can learn something from their mistakes and it saves you time, then try it. That's what I'm going to try this semester. It works.
I like that. Last question. All three ladies, how much do you consider the diversity of your group, or the diversity ethnically of your class in preparing your syllabus?
Preparing my syllabus?
Or, do you at all? Or do you?
I think that the way I believe that I consider that people come to my class with different experiences, and that they have different abilities, and that their background is going to influence what they choose and the way that they think about things. And I consider that I want students to learn from each other, and so I consider it in two ways. I don't necessarily explicitly state anything on my syllabus, but I try to build my assignments in ways that allow students to learn from each other. So whether it's peer assessment or small groups where I don't let them, I either randomly assign them to groups, I don't let them necessarily choose their own groups, because then they sit with their friends. And I often explain that especially so this is particularly relevant to my program evaluation courses that I teach, which, there's a big issue in terms of cultural competence and how people are able to understand different needs and different perspectives. And so one of the things that I talk to them about is the reason we have group work, and we even have an entire session in my class about the way that people work together and how we can respect each other's different ideas. And so we have a whole class where we just talk about what it means to be a part of a group and why we are working as a group. And the reason I have them do that is because I want them to respect each other's perspectives and not just dismiss them, and also feel comfortable sharing a perspective if it's not a perspective that's part of kind of the dominant way that people view things. The other way that I do that is in a very similar way. I allow them to choose their own topics for assignments as much as possible when I have classes that aren't necessarily topic specific. So like any kind of research methods, or even basic human development classes or basic educational psychology classes where they have a paper assignment or a literature search assignment, I say, look, you have your own experiences that you have here, things that you're interested in, choose your own topic, that's fine with me. So those are the ways that I do it probably.
I consider it in terms of the content I use in my class, in terms of choosing scholars from diverse backgrounds and work that touches on different experiences and things like that, which is probably pretty easy to do in sociology, because those are just a lot of the things that we're talking about are inequalities and people's experiences and things like that. So that's something that I try to do, to incorporate scholars from diverse backgrounds and research on people from diverse backgrounds. And also in terms of letting students choose their own topics, I think especially at UNLV, we get students from different educational backgrounds and different levels of preparedness. So having assignments throughout the semester that you can give them feedback on can help in that, in giving the students help who need that kind of help. So those are a couple of things that I do, and of course addressing the issue of being respectful to your fellow students. That's something that I put in terms of my course objectives, and we talk about on the first day and throughout the class. You know, having an opportunity to talk about different experiences, and giving them an opportunity to disagree with each other, but in respectful ways, and that's something that I build into my syllabus, and we talk about as we're talking about the class. So.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it is really important that students can choose their own topics when they are doing some sort of research project, because if you force them to research a particular thing, it will be resistant to it. So I think that enables them to explore and create what they are interested in.
And I would say as much as possible too, when they have to present back to their peers about their topic, this is a good way for them to also to kind of help cross-pollinate or understand that not everybody is interested in the same things you're interested in. Not everybody thinks about things the same way that you do. And so, I think that's a nice opportunity as well for students to, and as well as some of the topic-specific things. So, research, some people have strong research interests in topics in my field, in particular in education, and challenges facing students in urban settings, and problems in terms of, and as well as affordances for students and what they bring to the table in terms of how culture influences the way that students feel in school and the way that they act in school. And so oftentimes, almost every semester, we'll have students that bring those issues to the table as it is. And so I think that's also a nice way to deal with.
I guess I'm kind of in a toss-up for my class about required attendance and participation. I kind of wanted to get your ideas about, do you feel it's valid, or is it just kind of a gimme on the percentages, and kind of what you all think about
that? I didn't used to have an attendance policy, and then it was probably about a year ago. The attendance was terrible, and it's only a 2-unit class. It's only 50 minutes twice a week, and I started doing so many in-class exercises, and the students were not allowed to make it up if they were not in class. So I now have an attendance policy mainly because it is a first-year seminar. If they are skipping my class, they're likely skipping Bio 196 or 97, their math classes, and they're not going to be successful in their other classes if they're not going. And that's one of the goals of the first-year seminars, is that students are succeeding in all of their classes. So I have an attendance policy, I have a 3-minute late policy, and if they miss 3 classes, their grade drops to another grade. That's my policy. I stick to it.
I have an attendance and participation, like I've kind of put them together, but I'm very ambivalent about it, because the students who are highly motivated are going to show up regardless. I don't think it hurts to have it, so I'm generally pretty okay with it, but yeah, it can be difficult to, and actually trying to assess what participation is can be a little bit difficult. I've had students fill out little worksheets at the end about questions they have. The problem with that is trying to make sure that you have the time at the end of class, which doesn't always work. Or I'll base it on whether people are, if we do something in class, like a particular activity, who's in attendance for that. So those are a couple of the ways I've done it, but I change it every semester because I'm always trying to tweak it.
Yeah, I think it kind of, it's a little bit of an 8 to 10. So I think it also depends on the nature of your class. So in your situation, I think that is critical. You're socializing them into what it means to be a college student. I don't have attendance, I haven't had attendance policies for the last few years because I had a hard time necessarily always having a hard and fast sticking to it type of issue, which is more of a maybe I'm just too empathetic, I don't know. But the bigger, so what I do, I guess it's sneakier. I have particular assignments, so more participation-oriented types of assignments, and the same way, they're not allowed to make them up. So basically, if they don't attend class, they lose points. So I feel like it's their choice, and unless there's, I do have a couple instances where they can make them up, and it's usually a documented, documenting death in the family or an illness, but they need to contact me prior to the class to let me know that that has happened. If they contact me after the class, there's no chance to make it up. So I build it into the class, and I also believe that I do similar things, like I have response papers that are due at class where they have to bring questions to class and turn them in because I want to make sure that they read, and I also want them to participate and to feel prepared participating. It's easier oftentimes, I found, for students to come and having thought about a question than being asked, okay, who has a question? Okay, and then they're like, I don't know. And then I'm able to say, I see a paper in front of every single one of you. I know you have questions. Let's talk about some of these issues. So that's the way I do it. I think there's just different.
In terms of participation, at least for my students, science students in general, especially freshmen, tend to be very quiet and they will not participate no matter what. So one of the things I do a lot is I do a lot of think, pair, share, where I'll say, okay, with the person sitting next to you, discuss whatever it is. And then once they start talking to each other, because usually at the end of the semester they don't even look up, they don't look at each other, they don't, they're sitting there like this. So they need that interaction with each other. And so we do so much partner work where they have to discuss all these different things, and then they're more likely to participate when we come back as a group and say, okay, what did you come up with? What did you discuss?
Plus, sometimes it can be really threatening. I mean, if you think about school being a safe place where you're trying out new ideas, you want them to think critically, you want them to make mistakes, right? That's the whole point of education. It can be pretty scary to raise your hand and voice an opinion, even in a small class. If the instructor is somebody that you don't know very well, or you find intimidating, or they're a big scholar in your field or something, trying out those ideas on your peers is a lot safer, oftentimes, than kind of voicing it to somebody when you're not sure how they're going to respond, especially if you've seen negative responses or ways of communicating in other places.
What's the most innovative thing you've incorporated into one of your classes, or you thought of incorporating, as far as a learning exercise or evaluation?
That requires us to believe that we're innovative.
Yes, it does. I mean, we all, we're hearing more and more about the role of technology, or role of clickers, for example. Those have been established now for a while, but I mean, I'm sure all of you have been thinking about some of these frontiers that you want to push into.
I haven't included it. One of the things I've thought about doing, but I haven't because of the issue with cell phones, is the use of Socrative. It's like a text-based phone app, and it's like a clicker, but it is the students' use of phones. And I haven't used it because I'm concerned that students are going to remain on their phones. And so it's something that I wrestle with every semester because I think it would be really, really useful, but I haven't tried it, so I'm not really sure what else I can do.
Are your students bringing a lot of laptops into class to take notes?
It really depends. I have one class this semester. I teach 4 sections this semester, and I have one section where probably half of them have laptops. And we have small classes of 30 students for the class. And in past years, I've had students who don't even bring paper, they only bring a tablet. And then other classes where they only bring paper, so paper and pen. So it really varies. And it's really interesting to see how well students do based on, do they only have a tablet, do they only have a laptop? Because it seems that their retention of information really varies depending on what they bring. It's usually lower when they only have a laptop or a tablet. And I tell them that at the beginning, research is starting to show that if you only use a tablet to take notes, or if you only read your textbooks because you only have a PDF version of that textbook. You don't have an actual textbook. Your retention of that information is a lot lower, but it doesn't seem to have much effect.
I don't know that, if you're talking technology innovation, I wouldn't say that I've done anything particularly crazy in terms of asking students to go out and create video blogs of what they're doing or anything. I've thought about it. It just doesn't fit particularly well, I don't think, for some of my area. I've done things where I've asked them to go out and find examples in the real world of X, Y, and Z, and they can submit that however they want. They can take a little video of it, but then I worry about, them not understanding what's public behavior and what's not public behavior, and doing things. I'm the co-chair of the IRB, so I don't know. Like, do we really need to have an ethics conversation? But there's some issues with that, but they seem to respond to that pretty well in turn, and they've done some interesting things. I've had people submit videos of, this is the way I'm out, and this is how you were talking about the way that people use correlations in the real world, and this is an example that I see, and they take a little video of something they're looking at a bus stop or something, But I would say more from a teaching innovation, for me, I'd say probably the most innovative thing I've done in terms of learning has probably been going through the effort of developing community-based partnerships for learning that are not typically considered in the areas in which I teach. So that has been particularly helpful and is relatively innovative in research methods types of courses. So technology-wise, though, I'm still working on that. Having them give their video example, like video introductions and things like that in online courses has been useful. But
yeah, in terms of technology, I don't think I've used anything like the super out of the box or anything. I've thought about doing the clickers and everything like that. But one thing I've been considering implementing is using blogs in classes. I had a course blog where I would find all this stuff that I wanted to share with my students, but I didn't really have a way of showing it to them. So I gave them extra credit if they followed this blog, and they really responded well to that, and we were able to talk about those things in class. And I've considered having them design their own blogs or maybe post to a course blog, but that's something that I have yet to implement. I'm trying to defend my dissertation, so I'm like, well, let's save innovation.
And I would just caution that anytime you do something that is outside of what is expected, give yourself at least a couple times teaching that class before you feel like you've pretty much got it where it is. And recognize that you may take a hit in your evaluations that first semester because you're refining what's going on, and sometimes there's bumps and you get some really good feedback. There's always bumps with teaching, it's okay. but recognize that there's implications for that. It's a good thing to do, but it never goes flawlessly the first time, or rarely. If you have a secret on how to make that happen, please let me know. I would like to know.
Who in this room has created a syllabus? What is something that you left off the syllabus you regretted? I'm just curious. I think all of us have probably had the students who come and something you never anticipated happen with the legal ramification. And you start wondering about lawyers or something like that.
One, I regret it initially, but in the end, it worked out more in a positive nature than I thought, which is speaking on going back to attendance. I didn't put attendance on there. I have a good mentor, so he says, if you pay for something, you don't go to the store and pay for a meal, and then they just give you a sandwich and fries and leave out the drink, right? You always go back to the counter, where's my drink? I paid for it, it's mine. So when students come to these college courses, they're paying for these courses, they're paying for the knowledge. They're paying essentially to excel, to get closer to their endeavors. So you may have students that initially don't come to class at all, but that's why you have the in-class assignments, participation, et cetera, in the end, the students who did not come to class, they grew more accountable and responsible towards the end and started showing up a lot more, like mid-section of the course. And so and then they became more they started participating a lot more, thinking that they can make it up, which you can't, but now you're learning. And now they're retaining the information and understanding on a way more deeper level, just because they learned to be accountable and responsible due to things that they missed out on. And everybody comes to the point within themselves like, I'm not going to do that again. I cannot do that again. So the next course didn't have that problem. Word went around, everything, and there you go. So I regretted it at first, but then it worked out more because I was able to give students a higher quality than they probably would have expected coming to the class, which was they learned accountability and responsibility.
I think for myself, it's not something that I left out so much as something that I put in, which I think speaks to what they all said about trying to keep it basic and then kind of updating the assignments as they come along. There was a really great simulation on gerrymandering. I teach political science 101, and it was a great simulation. I had this awesome assignment based off of the simulation. And then halfway through the semester, I tried to go to the simulation, and they shut it down. And so it was written into the syllabus, and I thought, oh gosh, what am I going to do now? And I had to just cancel the assignment. So I think rather than something I regretted leaving out, something really specific putting in that I wasn't sure was going to be there halfway through the semester. So that was something I regretted for myself.
I'd say I regretted not having an explicit makeup policy in the beginning, because that's something students will fully take advantage of if you don't have that in your syllabus. I found that out.
I'm being very clear about that. In mine, I say, no makeups unless you have a documented emergency. And for documentation, when my student brought in a note from her mom, that doesn't really count. To be very specific
I had
about.
to jail from Clark County.
No, I had a friend who one of her students was incarcerated and couldn't make things up. So I'm like, incarceration? That's a good excuse not to come to class. Can't really make it to class. So.
I'm a little bit the opposite in terms of that, because I used to have a very explicit in my policy. There are no makeups, none, unless there's this documented. And what I found is that especially since in some of my graduate classes where I maintain that policy, I think it works a little bit better with undergraduates, but people have lied. Many of my students work full time, they have it, and I believe that, if you really want to learn this, you'll commit the time you need to commit, but things happen. A child gets sick or something like that, or things happen, and then I would find myself making exceptions to that policy that I didn't feel comfortable with, because I'm like, this is the policy I have, and I'm undermining my own policy. And so the way that I changed that is I have a 5% per day penalty. So I allow the makeup, but there's a penalty for that makeup unless there's a documented.
Yeah.
The only time that I don't allow there to be penalty is if there's a real emergency. And so in that way, I feel like I've been able to strike my own balance with what I'm comfortable with, as well as I'm able to stick to that. And this is something, I played around with like 4 or 5 different versions of a policy for that over the years. And this is the one that I've settled on, and it's the one that I feel that I can be the most consistent about and is defensible for me in terms of not interfering with learning, but at the same time holding them accountable for their own learning. So I think you just have to find something that you can stick with.
Yes. I don't like to have makeups because I don't want to have people turning things in.
I need to make up a test. I'm going to come 4 times.
Yeah. So what I do is I have kind of flexible assignments. So I'll have there's 16 of these assignments that will be up. Choose 6 of them and do those 6. So that way students can choose the ones that fit into their schedule, and that way I don't have to grade 16 assignments from 40 students. So it's a little bit more flexible for them, and they can it can fit into their schedule. And if they do have an emergency come up, then they can just say, well, I guess I'm not going to do that assignment. So that's great. Yeah, there's different ways to kind of manage that. having to deal with those makeup assignments. Because yeah, a lot of our students, they do have, you know, family obligations and work obligations that keep them from maybe turning things in on time. And I think it's important to have something built in to respond to that, whether it be, you know, a penalty for late assignments or flexible due dates or something like that.
Well, this might be a good moment then to stop and go design our syllabi and new assignments. We've got plenty of inspiration. So thank you to our panelists. This has been really, really informative. And again, all of your expertise well on display here. So thanks for sharing all your insights. And we now know how that will trickle down to our students and all of your classrooms. So thanks and enjoy the rest of your Friday.